Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third chapter of the semester. So this one, I'm going to go ahead and preface this whole lecture with, this is probably one of the toughest chapters we do all semester. I'm going to break it down into 3 lectures. So I urge you to kind of get a head start on this one near the end of the second week, but I'll talk about that in the introduction to the courses as well. So what we want to do is, as always, start off with a little quote. So the success isn't owned, it's leased, and the rent is due every day. So you got to put in that time, put in that work to be successful. We all know that anatomy and physiology is a class that takes far more effort than most, a lot of extra time, a lot of extra work to be done, but it is doable and manageable if you break this down. Like I always oftentimes say, it's like eating an elephant, and how do you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So as we go about this, let's remind ourselves that every exam that I give, I'm going to be asking you guys questions on each exam from these chapter objectives. That's what I'm basing the exam on. These chapter objectives are from our department, so it's not what Mr. Lefford says that I'm going to be teaching. It's what the college says I need to be teaching and testing on. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach them and I'm going to test on them. So that way you have a clear agreement of an understanding of what it is I'm going to be expecting of you, which makes it more doable in a class like this taught completely online. So we want to go back and really go back and step back to a chapter 1 topic that you learned in AP 1, and that was homeostasis, an internal steady state. Homeostasis basically means that it's standing steady, that you're stabilized. Your patient is stabilized. They're stable. And a lot of times in healthcare, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be thinking, how can I stabilize my patient? How can I get them stable, whether they're bleeding or whether they're in some kind of problem, they're in shock, they're have a hormone imbalance, something's going on, some problem in their body. Well, remember, there were 2 control systems in the body, the nervous system and the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is the one that does everything slow and steady. The endocrine system is one of the major systems to control homeostasis, keep us in a steady state. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. It's called feedback. And there's positive feedback and negative feedback. Now, positive feedback, we want to remember, so what we want to do when we talk about positive feedback is think about that if I were to draw a line right here, this line would be a set point. This line would be the normal value or the homeostatic range for a thing in our body. And that thing in our body, let's say this was glucose levels, 70 to 110 would be the normal value that we would have for that. Now, in this, so we can have the value, the homeostatic range, could go up. It could go up to high, or it could go down to low. And anytime this happens, we would say this is a stimulus. Remember, a stimulus is nothing more than the change in something being regulated, the change in the level of something being regulated. So with a homeostatic level, the range, the normal range of this thing were to go up or go down, well, depending on the kind of feedback, and the first feedback we discuss here is positive. So let's write down here below that, let's write positive feedback, positive feedback. And in a positive feedback mechanism, what you're going to have happen is that the stimulus were to go up, what is going to occur is the body, when it responds to that, it will respond in the same direction. So if the stimulus were to rise, were to go up, the body would respond to also push it upwards, but actually would cause it to become even worse. The stimulus and the body's response go in the same direction. And here, if the stimulus were to lower from homeostatic range, the body would respond to take it even further away. So you will see that in positive feedback, the stimulus and the body's response always go in the same directions. And this always results in the body taking us away from homeostasis. Body always takes us away from homeostasis. Now, the opposite to that, if I had a homeostatic value or range here, and you were to have a stimulus that was the change in something being regulated, whether it went down or went up, it's still a stimulus. If we were to see a negative feedback, I'm going to abbreviate it FB just to make it easier to fit on the screen, that here are the two stimuli. The stimuli goes above homeostatic range or below homeostatic range. Let's start what happens in negative feedback mechanism when the stimulus increases. So the body needs to respond. There will be a body response, and that will take it back to homeostasis, back to normal, back to the range. So here we see the stimulus and the body's response go in opposite directions. Now, case in point, here we have a lowered stimulus. The value, the homeostatic range was down below normal. That means we need to get that back up to normal, so the body's response goes back up. So you will see the stimulus and the body's response are going opposite in a negative feedback. Where in positive feedback, the stimulus and the body's response go in the same direction. So in this case, we are always bringing ourselves in negative feedback back to homeostasis, back to stability, back to a steady state. So positive feedbacks always increase the disturbance, takes us away from homeostasis. We can say they push us to completion. So let's give a great example of this that happens in the body. Let's say that during childbirth, the head of the fetus starts to enter the cervical canal. That will stretch the cervical canal, and as that stretches, that will cause a stimulus from the cervix to cause the uterine muscles to contract, pushing the baby into the cervical canal more, dilating it more, causing and so what you're doing is getting this constant pushing to completion. It gets worse before it gets better. Now, in negative feedback, what you're going to see is, of course, the stimulus and body response go in opposite directions. This brings us back to stability. This decreases your disturbance, negates the stimulus. So if something is happening here, like if blood pressure goes up in the body releases some hormones to lower the blood pressure back to normal. Or if the blood pressure were to drop, the body could too low, the body could release some hormones or do some neural stimulation, get the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system involved to come in to get the heart rate up, things like that, to get the blood pressure up. So we will see that negative negates the stimulus where positive pushes to completion. So when we lose homeostasis, this is what most diseases are. Things like diarrhea, constipation, diabetes mellitus, type 1, type 2. These are all losses of homeostasis, where something is going wrong with the positive or negative feedback systems. If you have an inability to do negative feedback due to damage to a gland, then of course we have a disease. We now have diabetes, for example, or thyroiditis, some other issues like that. So as we talk about that, I like to kind of introduce it kind of a clinical way to let you guys understand this is why you're learning it. Now, what we want to start off with is to understand what is the main players. Think of this slide right here is like the program for a play that you're going to see. You don't know much about the play, so we're going to go in and we're going to say, well, who are the characters and what's their background story, so I know something about them, so I know, okay, that's this character, this is what's going on, this is the role they play in it, this is the bad guy, this is the good guy, this is the person who helps the good guy, etc., etc. Well, this is kind of what we got going on here. We are going to have hormones, target cells, and glands. Okay, that's basically what we got going on here. Hormones, target cells, and glands. Now, the endocrine system is going to be using hormones, and hormones are chemical messengers. And what these chemical messengers are, so they are chemicals with structures that are in the bloodstream, and they will control body functions, and they will go to a cell called a target cell, and they can go to that target cell, and they can turn that target cell on and off. Let me kind of show you here. We're going to draw that out a little bit. So let's say, if you will, let me kind of pick this color here. And let's say I have a gland right here. And this is an endocrine gland. Endocrine gland right here. It could be any of the endocrine glands that we have: thyroid gland, pancreas, pituitary gland, adrenal gland, whatever, any gland in your body. What this gland is going to do is, nearby this gland, you're going to have some blood vessels nearby, some capillaries nearby. Because of that, we have a cell that we need to get and target. And let's say this cell over here, this is our target cell. I'm just going to put a T in it for target. Now, this target cell has to be able to respond to that hormone. So let's say this endocrine gland, what it's going to do is it's going to release a chemical called a hormone. And this hormone's got a very unique shape to it that allows it to do the job that it does. So as it releases a hormone, it does so, releases that hormone into an area called the extracellular space. Extracellular space. And that extracellular space, those hormones enter into that area here. And as they enter extracellular space, they can then diffuse into the bloodstream. And as they do that, you can have then you'll have these hormones in the blood. And then the blood will carry that hormone here to the target cell. And that target cell will have a receptor for that hormone on it. And that hormone will bind to your receptor. And this target cell now can be either stimulated or inhibited based on the arrival of that hormone, based on the hormone that arrives there. So as we will see, hormones, they bind to a target cell. Now an endocrine gland makes that hormone. It goes into the extracellular space that's around the gland cells, around the secretory cells of that gland. Why is that? These glands do not have ducts. They are ductless glands. They lack ducts, so they have to go somewhere, so they secrete into the bloodstream. So if we know they go into extracellular space, then it goes into the blood. Remember that endocrine secretes endoblood. Endocrine, endoblood. Endoblood. It goes in the bloodstream carries that hormone all the way to the target cell, and it may stimulate that target cell, it may inhibit that target cell's metabolism. Let's say that cell's metabolic job was to make an enzyme or make a protein, or that cell's job was to divide, or that cell's job was to use energy, or that cell's job was to burn glucose, or something like that. A hormone would go to that cell and say, okay, cell, either you release an enzyme or inhibit the release of an enzyme. You either divide or don't divide. You either make a protein or don't make a protein, depending upon the hormone it gets. Now, there are two types of glands that are out there. Endocrine, we know, goes into the blood. Endocrine, endoblood, no ducts, secretes hormones into blood. Exocrine, on the other hand, it makes other secretions. It secretions, now this should say secretions, not sections. Every now and again, I find little typos that I have in my notes. I'll put that nice and red so you guys can see that in the recording. I do apologize. I've written these and I type everywhere myself, so it's easy to happen, and I try never to have those kinds of mistakes, but I don't have anybody editing, and usually I'm teaching these classes, and my first time teaching them was 2 weeks notice, not a lot of time to prepare everything. So what we'll see is that exocrine, it carries it uses a duct. And these ducts, they'll take any secretion to a body surface or the inside of a body cavity. For example, let's say it takes it to the skin, like sweat, or it takes it to the skin like oils from the skin, sebaceous glands, or it secretes into the digestive tract, or into a body cavity like your digestive tract, to your stomach, to your digestive tract, body cavities, to those things, body cavities like mucus. Okay, mammary glands, glands that make your milk, or sebaceous glands, mucus glands, goblet cells. You know, the goblet cells were the mucus glands. If you guys ever forget that, just remember, imagine a champagne goblet full of snot, a snot goblet, and it's just full of snot, mucus. Mucus glands are goblet cells. Okay. Now, what we will also see, now these are the main endocrine glands that we're going to talk about. There are other tissues out there that produce hormones, but these are the glands that are considered endocrine glands. Now, we will see one, especially one of these will kind of be a 2-for-1 deal. We'll talk about it a little bit when we get to it in the lecture and in lab as well. But what I want to kind of say is these are all the main endocrine glands. First one we're going to talk about is the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. Then we'll talk about the pituitary. And the pituitary has two parts to it. There's an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe that we'll talk about. The pineal gland, the thyroid. And on the back of the thyroid, we know there are two parathyroid glands on each side. There's a pair of parathyroids on each side of the thyroid. The thymus. The suprarenal, which I will usually call it suprarenal, that is my preferred term to use, but also sometimes called the adrenal glands. We saw that in the autonomic nervous system. We saw the suprarenal medulla or adrenal medulla, which is part of that gland. The pancreas, and then the gonads. Now, the gonads is either the testes for the male or the ovaries for the female. Okay, so as we look at those glands, as you guys would go through, here are some of the glands. Now, what we want to do is kind of get an idea where they are. Now, starting with the first one, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is in the brain. Now, I'm going to zoom in here. Hypothalamus, here we have our thalamus, and the word hypothalamus means below thalamus. So that's thalamus. This is below thalamus, hypothalamus. Now, the pituitary gland is just below the hypothalamus. Now, if I were to make sure we saw our pituitary gland here, pituitary gland is just below the hypothalamus. Then we saw our pineal gland. Pineal gland is in the back of the brain here, under the corpus callosum. And just here is the corpora quadrigemina of the midbrain. So it's right here. Then as we continue on down, we go into the neck, where the thyroid gland is this butterfly-looking gland. And on the back of the thyroid, there's a pair of parathyroids on the posterior thyroid. You have two here on the back side. In the mediastinum and chest region, you will find the thymus gland. Then, on top of our kidneys, we will find the adrenal glands or suprarenal gland. I prefer suprarenal because I am more of a descriptive person. I prefer descriptives. And then behind our stomach is our pancreas, and then our gonads. Now, we will discuss gonads far more in depth when we get to the reproductive system. Now, we will discuss specifically here, we will discuss minimally the heart, but we will discuss minimally the kidneys as some extra tissues and mention them, but these will be discussed more in like the cardiovascular system, chapter 20 and 21. As well as we'll talk about the thymus more in 22, lymphatics, immunity, and we'll discuss the kidneys more in urinary and fluid and electrolyte acid-base balance. Now, also a little bit in blood, like when we talk about erythropoietin. I will mention that they secrete those things and basically what they do, but I'll discuss their job and how they do it later on in other chapters. And so as we go through this, what we want to do now, our first goal is one of the things that I'm going to ask you guys on an exam is to be able to match a gland to its secretion. Okay. So be able to do that. One of the big things I'm going to want you guys to be able to do here is say what gland secretes what. Now, remember, you've got to be able to do every objective on a test, but I'm letting you know one of the questions I'm going to ask you guys on the test, some of the questions are going to be which of the following hormones are secreted by the blank gland or vice versa. Okay, so let's start off here. Hypothalamus. Now, we're going to see. First off, I'm going to give you abbreviations. Later on, I will do some of the big terms, and we'll look at them. Right now, I will give you the full term, but we're going to start with the hypothalamus making ADH, OT or OXT, RH, and IH. Now, what is this? ADH. What does that stand for? Anti. What does anti mean? Against. Diuretic. What does diuretic mean? It is referencing diuresis. What is diuresis? Making urine. So it's anti-diuresis. It goes against making urine. So this hormone, antidiuretic hormone, ADH, prevents the formation of urine, which means it retains water. It causes you to retain water. It causes you to produce less urine, concentrating urine. OTOXT, oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone released that does a lot of things. It is causing the reproductive tract to contract, to release, for example, seminal fluids during male orgasm, or also causes milk letdown. It causes milk to ooze. We'll talk about that later on. RH and IH. RH stands for releasing hormones, and IH stands for inhibiting hormones. The hypothalamus releases regulatory hormones that cause the release of other hormones or the inhibition of other hormones. For example, you might release a hormone called thyroid-releasing hormone, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone. Okay, some hormones that cause the release or inhibiting of other hormones. Prolactin inhibiting hormone. So they releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones, RHIH. Now, the pituitary gland has two lobes, an anterior one in the front and a posterior one in the back. Now, the anterior lobe does a handful of hormones. Now, one of the things I often say is for all of the hormones here, we will see for pituitary gland is that pituitary gland overall releases a goat flap. A goat flap, or M goat flap. Sorry, M goat flap, not a goat flap. M goat flap. What's M? Goat flap. M, MSH. M, G, goat. M goat flap. M, F, MSH. G, GH. O, oxytocin. A, ADH. T, TSH, F, FSH, L, LH, A, ACTH, and P, PRL. M, goat flap. M, goat flap is all pituitary hormones. Now, what we also will see here is that some people will say one of the ways to learn the anterior pituitary hormones is M, flat, pig. M, flat, pig. What's M, flat, pig? M, MSH. L, FSH. F, M, flat, pig, sorry. M, MSH. F, FSH. L, LH. A, ACTH. T, TSH. P, PRL. I stands for ignore because I wanted to spell flat pig, and G is GH. That's a mnemonic a lot of some that I've used in the past is M flat pig. You just got to remember that I stands for ignore. So if I ever ask you guys which of these is produced from that particular part, now OA, posterior pituitary, releases oxytocin and ADH. You're like, wait a minute, Mr. Lefford, you just said the hypothalamus produces ADH and oxytocin, and now you're telling me the posterior pituitary does too. The posterior pituitary stores and releases it, we're going to see. The hypothalamus produces ADH and oxytocin, where the posterior pituitary stores and releases it. Now, the thyroid, you will notice, has T in every one of them. T3, T4, CT. Thyroid hormone T3, T4. Okay? T3, T4. T3, triiodothyronine. T4, tetraiodothyronine. CT, calcitonin. So thyroid, T3, T4, CT. Parathyroid, very easy, makes PTH. That's parathyroid hormone. Now, suprarenal gland or adrenal gland. Suprarenal gland has a cortex and a medulla to it. Now, the cortex, think about this as adrenal cortex. Adrenal cortex is a name you might call this. Adrenal cortex, AC. All the hormones here start with an A or a C. Androgens, aldosterone, and cortisol. Androgens, aldosterone, cortisol. Now, another thing is that suprarenal cortex, adrenal cortex, AC, androgens, aldosterone, cortisol. Androgens, mineralocorticoids, and glucocorticoids. Our mineralocorticoid is aldosterone, and our glucocorticoids are cortisol that we're concerning ourselves with. Now, the medulla of the suprarenal gland produces epinephrine, norepinephrine. We already know this from autonomic nervous system, chapter 16. Now, pineal gland. Pineal gland is releasing melatonin, which mellows you out and makes you sleepy. Thymus makes thymosins. Very easy to remember that. Thymosins by thymus. It's got this thymus in it. It's got thyme in there. Pancreas, we probably all know that pancreas makes insulin. But we also may know that it makes glucagon. Maybe we didn't know that. Now, it makes a hormone that is called growth hormone inhibiting hormone, GHIH. Then it makes one abbreviated PP. PP for pancreas is pancreatic polypeptide. Pancreatic polypeptide, PP. Now, the gonads, they are your testes and ovaries, and they make sex hormones. Now, males, they produce in their testes testosterone. Easy to remember that testosterone is in the testes. It's got test in it. Ovaries make estrogens. It is gens. It is plural. There's 3 types of estrogen. And then progesterone. And we're going to see now pro, meaning in favor of, gestation, own, it's a steroid. So that tells you, progesterone tells you it's a steroid hormone that is in favor of gestation or pregnancy. Okay. Estrogens, those are the female sex hormones. Primarily beta estradiol is the big one. Estradiol is the most abundant. There's estrol and estrone as well. Biochemically, some subtle differences with functional groups that are on them, but we don't go into that. All right, now endocrine. Remember, this is like the tortoise and the hare. Tortoise and the hare. You guys may remember the tortoise and the hare got into a race. It's one of those fables that happened. And the hare was a rabbit. It was a rabbit, named for a rabbit, large rabbit. And this rabbit, the hare, was going to race the tortoise. And the tortoise is slow. And the rabbit, the hare, says, I will beat this tortoise so easy. I'm fast. Let me show you. And they have the race and they take off. And the rabbit's gone like a shot. And he's gone and he's running off. And he leaves the tortoise in the dust. And the rabbit, the hare, stops and says, I'm so far ahead, I'm just going to take a nap, and I'm just going to, man, I'm still going to beat him by a mile. Bam, I'm done. So he lays down, takes a nap, falls asleep, wakes up, realizes a long time had gone, but the tortoise just kept going and kept going. He never stopped. So slow and steady won the race, didn't it? Now, endocrine is like the tortoise. It has a very long-lasting effect, and so it's long-lasting. It's slow and steady. It takes a long time to make it work, but it lasts for a very long time. But endocrine and nervous system both control the body. Okay, so it works with the nervous system. They're longer lasting. Slow and steady wins the race. And but it works alongside the nervous system. Now, if we look at these, you will see the nervous system and the endocrine system are incredibly different. They are so different, and yet both control the body. Now, let's just kind of step back to say nervous system allows me to do things that I need to do very quickly. Let's say I need to jump out of the way of a speeding bus. Nervous system. Endocrine system, if you want to go through puberty. Now, puberty took a long time. Now, to do that, think about the nervous system is somewhat, we say it's wired. It uses neurons and synapses. In the endocrine system, it's not wired. You got glands. Now, nervous system uses neurotransmitters, whereas endocrine uses hormones. Hormones, remember, guys, are always traveling in the bloodstream. These are chemical messengers that diffuse in the extracellular space around a gland, diffuse then into the bloodstream, travel through the bloodstream to get to their target cells. So given that, that is a unique hormone. Now, neurotransmitters. If you remember a synapse, you might remember the presynaptic cell is very, very close to the postsynaptic cell. There is only a small distance between them called a synaptic cleft. And so that means neurotransmitters, when they diffuse from pre to postsynaptic cell, they don't travel very much distance. It's very close. But endocrine, the target cell, is on has a receptor, and that could be very far away from the gland, miles of blood vessels away. Okay? You can have a pituitary gland up in the brain, and then the target cell is down in the gonads on the other end of the body. So that's a long way. Now, so receptors are close in nervous system. Receptors are far away in the endocrine system. And that means hormones travel long distances. Now, nervous system, very fast, quick commands. That would be like jump out of the way of a speeding bus, whereas nervous system has a very delayed response, takes a long time for it to happen. That means if you have a very carry out it quickly nervous system, because it does things quick, it has a very short lasting effect. But nervous system has long lasting effect. So that's why we would use endocrine to go through puberty to regulate things like growth and growing body hair in the right place, to develop your reproductive organs and your secondary characteristics like breasts, where they grow, where facial hair and other hair is going to grow in our body, things like that. But nervous system would be needed for things like jumping out of the way of a speeding bus. If you had to use the endocrine system to jump out of the way of a bus, you would die. So anyway, hope that helps a little bit. Now, as I said, there were 3 players in the endocrine system. 3 components, 3 parts. So what I've drawn here, guys, is an endocrine pathway. Now, what I'm going to do is kind of do it this way as well. Let's kind of step back and say, let's look at this. I'm always a person. I like to draw things out. I always like to kind of make sure that it helps you guys grasp it better. So here I have an endocrine gland. I'm just going to say E for endocrine gland. Over here, I have a target cell that could be a long way away. And then right here, I'm going to have all the blood vessels in the body. This is just the entirety of the human circulatory system. It's starting to slow down a little bit, but it's okay. I got it somewhat. So here we are in the blood. Now remember, this is your endocrine pathway. So what is happening in an endocrine pathway is this endocrine gland will release hormones into this space here. It releases hormones into the space. They diffuse in to the bloodstream. The blood starts to flow. And what it is doing is carrying these hormones through the bloodstream to the target cell. And when it gets to that target cell, it can either stimulate or inhibit the activities of that target cell in an endocrine pathway. So we start with an endocrine gland that secretes the hormone into the ECF, extracellular fluids, extracellular space. It then goes into the blood. Then that chemical messenger, a hormone, enters the bloodstream and circulates. Now, here's what's really cool about that hormone. That hormone has a shape to it. Remember back in A&P1, something I know I taught and really emphasized in the first chapter was form, fits, function. And I said to all my students, I said, guys, you wouldn't eat peas with a hammer, and you wouldn't drive a nail with a fork. Well, right tool for the right job. The shape of that tool determines the job. Well, the hormone has a shape to it that lets it do its job. Why? The receptor on the target cell is going to be able to, if the hormone has the right shape, can interact with that hormone. Only the hormone that can bind to the specific receptor if that hormone shape is specific enough and allows it to bind. Okay? Now, hormone binds to that receptor and activates it. Turns it on or turns it off, stimulates or inhibits. Now, because this is the first thing that arrives, the hormone of an endocrine pathway is the thing that comes in to that cell to tell it to do what it needs to do in the endocrine pathway. We call that the first messenger. Now, the first messenger, hormone, it can be in the bloodstream and active for a range of time. It could be minutes to over an hour or so. Now, some hormones you guys know are effective for quite a while. You may have been scared sometimes as a child, get really scared, get spooked, and what happens is it took you a very long time to come down from that fear. That's because your adrenaline, your hormones, the adrenaline being produced by suprarenal medulla, was still present in the bloodstream sometime after the initial fright. Now, that target cell can respond and produces a very specific response if that hormone is there. Now, that target cell has a receptor. That receptor is unique to that hormone. If that receptor can bind that hormone, that receptor can basically interpret that message. That receptor protein has a shape, has a structure that could be compatible to that hormone. If it is, it will work, it will bind to it, it will interpret the message from that hormone and say, this is what I need to do. This is the action I need to do because I got this hormone, okay? That hormone acts kind of like a message, like somebody leaves you a note saying, hey, while you're out, pick up a jug of milk, pick up a carton of milk, and you're like, okay, I'll do that. I'm going to do this because it was bugging me, and I sometimes don't see that. I'm like, okay, let me fix that because it was bugging it just bugs me. Sorry. Okay, so now something we are going to talk about is cells have to talk. You have trillions of them in your body, trillions of cells, and they have to talk. So we have intracellular communication. Hold on one second. I apologize for my typo. I want intracellular. I'll go ahead and let that sit there. Sorry about that. Now, there are four types of what we call intracellular communications, communications between different cells. Now, sometimes these are within the cells in the same tissue, sometimes it's cells in different tissues. Now, there's direct communication. Now, this is involved in cells of the same type. It is not within a cell itself. It's between two cells, but they have to be of the same type, where they exchange ions or other molecules between two cells using gap junctions. Direct communication uses gap junctions. Now, they have to be the same type. For example, two heart muscle cells can talk to each other using that. Because of this, like the heart is one of the main places where we're going to see this, so it's very specialized, relatively rare, but where it happens is incredibly important for cells to talk. Now, paracrine, where it does happen, is incredibly important. It uses chemicals we refer to as paracrine factors. Another name for those is cytokines from cell to cell within the same tissue. Now, it is the most common. Now, I will give you guys, if you've already had lab, I'm going to give you a very important place this happens. Now, if you've already seen my lab notes on this, if you haven't, if you want to come back to this after I do the pancreas in later on recording. But in the pancreas, we're going to see there's a cell called a beta cell. And surrounding beta cells are many cells, but one of the important cells around there is called an alpha cell. Now, beta cells release insulin to lower blood glucose, and alpha cells release glucagon to raise blood glucose. Now, here's the problem. Both do opposite jobs. So if we're trying to lower glucose, the last thing we want is alpha cells to do their thing. So what we do is basically, I come in here with a blood vessel, and this blood vessel here, right dead center here, is going to give off all these capillaries out. And what it's going to do is, as this happens, it picks up beta cell secretions and takes it to the alpha cells. And so what you have is paracrine communication here. You have beta cells talking to alpha cells. They're in the pancreas tissues. They're in the same tissue, but it's communication from cell to cell within the same tissue. Now, clinically, this is what's going on. What you're trying to kind of regulate when a patient who might have types of, like type 1 diabetes is some of the drugs will try to influence this mechanism, okay? So I did want to talk about it just to give you an example that is clinically relevant enough that later on you'll see it when you guys get into pathophys. Okay, now autocrine is, you secrete in the ECF, yes. It's called an autocrine factor, yes. What is important about autocrine? The cell affects itself. It affects the cell that secreted it. So let's say I'm secreting some material, and let's say I produce too much of it. That material accumulates outside my cell in the ECF and starts binding to receptors on my cell surface saying there's enough, stop releasing it. Okay? Negative feedback. Now, endocrine communication. It goes into the bloodstream. Hormones in the bloodstream. Now, why would you do that? Let's say that I need to, if I go into the bloodstream, pretty much every tissue in your body to some degree gets stuff from the blood. Now, does every tissue have direct blood supply? No, but every tissue in your body eventually is getting its stuff vicariously through the bloodstream. So the bloodstream goes on out. It can carry those hormones to all throughout the body. And I can pretty much affect many tissues and many organs throughout my body at the same time, or roughly at the same time. Now, synaptic is one you guys should be familiar with from AMP1. First, starting out with the neuromuscular junction. Then, secondly, when we did neurotissue, you guys would have seen chemical synapses there where like neurotransmitters used. For example, acetylcholine released at the neuromuscular junction, bound to the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, allowing sodium to come in. depolarizing the muscle cell. Now, there was neuromuscular junction, neuron to muscle cell. There was neuron to neuron. That was your typical thing. That's what we see in the ganglia of autonomic nervous system is neuron to neuron, or neuroglandular junction. Now, sometimes a gland will secrete endocrine or exocrine if it gets neural stimulus. Now, let's give you a great example of this. Suprarenal medulla. Okay. Now, another example would be an exocrine gland. An exocrine gland, think about salivary glands. Facial nerve branches come in, stimulate it to secrete saliva. Okay. So you could see direct communication, cell to cell, through gap junctions. Now, two of these, paracrine and autocrine, use the ECF. Paracrine must be cell to cell with the same tissue. Autocrine, I release a substance and it binds to my own cell, the cell that released it, to limit the production. Think of it like it says, hey, I'm secreting a hormone. Once I've made enough of that hormone that's out there, I can shut off the production of that hormone. Endocrine goes into the blood. Synaptic goes across synapses, releases neurotransmitters. Now it's very, 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 very small area of effect. It only occurs there, very specific at that synapse. For example, preganglionic neuron synapsing with postganglionic neuron in sympathetic, parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, or upper motor neuron synapsing with lower motor neuron in the somatic nervous system. Okay. Now, what happens when a hormone binds to a cell? Hormone traveled, it was released from an endocrine gland. It went into the extracellular fluids. It traveled into the bloodstream, got into the blood, traveled through the bloodstream, got to the target cell. It's there now. And it binds to the target cell. What does it do? There's 5 main things that a hormone does when it gets to its target cell. One of the things it might do is change permeability of the cell. Let's say a hormone binds to a cell, and when it does this, it opens up proteins to let something come in. Let me give you a great example of this. One of the things we might do is we release a hormone into our blood called insulin. Insulin will help certain cells take in glucose. Okay? Insulin gets glucose into the cell. So, if that's the case, it changed the permeability of that cell to glucose. It also could cause the synthesis of proteins. Let me give you a great example of that. Growth hormone will cause the production of proteins in your muscles, make you get swole. It will turn on or turn off enzymes. Great example of that was calcitonin going in and turning off osteoclasts, and parathyroid hormone coming in and stimulating osteoclasts in the bone tissues. You would have seen that in the osseous tissue chapter in AMP1. It could cause it to produce a secretion. For example, you could have a hormone released from the brain, goes down to the gonads to make the gonads release a sex hormone, or release a hormone that maybe it goes from one thing to another gland in the brain. For example, one of the common things that happens is hypothalamus tells the pituitary tells the gonads. It's a very common producing secretion mechanism. And it can also stimulate cell division, mitosis and meiosis. For example, growth hormone causes the mitosis of cells. Certain hormones, like you may have heard of follicle stimulating hormone, stimulates meiosis of your sex cells, your gametes. So these are 5 things that hormones do when they get to a target cell. They could change permeability. They could cause that cell to produce proteins. They could activate or inactivate enzymes. They could cause it to produce secretions or cause the cells to divide in some way, mitosis, meiosis. It could do more than one, okay? But that's what it does, okay? So if we got that, let's look at what would that do in the body. If I were to do these 5 things here, what would that be an impact on the body? Well, one of the things that would do is help me maintain homeostasis. If I can come in and change permeability, I'm getting glucose out of the blood and putting it into a muscle tissue. I am now lowering blood sugar. And by controlling permeability, I'm maintaining homeostasis. What if I'm regulating metabolism? Well, let's say I go in and I activate enzymes that might help me break down food, producing a secretion that might help me break down food, synthesizing a protein that will help in metabolism. Okay. Energy usage. That's kind of goes in there. Say that this can make a cell start to burn more energy, start to produce more ATP or less ATP. Regulates muscle contractions, and I don't mean skeletal muscles. I'm talking about heart muscle contractions. I'm talking about smooth muscle contractions specifically. For example, you can have a hormone that binds to a cell, a heart muscle cell, causing calcium to enter that cell to cause that cell to contract more intensely. Because in AMP1, you learned that calcium causes muscle contractions. It can regulate a secretion, making a gland secrete more or less. It can regulate growth by making that cell divide through mitosis, or regulate development. One of the things that has to happen in development is cells have to be able to increase metabolism. They got to be able to divide. They got to change their energy usage. They even have to be able to change the proteins they produce. They got to be able to do a lot of things in your development. And hormones affect development of you from a little embryo. And there's lots of them that you guys produced. Then they regulate reproduction. And this will be things like, you guys know that is, say you were trying to see if somebody's trying to get pregnant, you might measure certain hormone levels. Regulating reproduction, like progesterone levels, estrogen levels. We might look to see if they are pregnant, seeing if the mother's producing human chorionic gonadotropin, which is another hormone produced by the portion that becomes the placenta very early on, called the chorion layer that goes on to ultimately produce the main part of the placenta. All right, so that's all big stuff. Now I'm going to tell you, the part I'm getting ready to go into is something I would spend some extra time on and getting those into your head. If you guys come to our study group, one of the things we're going to have you do is list these, okay? Now, what I want to do is I want to discuss the 3 chemical classifications. Now, here's what I do on my exam. On my exam, there will be 3 questions on chemical classification of hormones, where I say, which of the following hormones are amino acid derivatives? Which of the following is a peptide derivative? Which of the following is a lipid derivative? What am I going to do? You will see 1 amino acid derivative, 1 peptide derivative, 1 lipid derivative on this exam, okay? So as you're going through, make sure you know each of them. I'm not going to tell you which one I'm going to ask you, but I'm going to say you will see an amino acid, a peptide, and a lipid. Okay? Which ones and which subclasses even? I'm not going to tell you. Okay, so let's look at that. First, now, if you look at this, you could see amino acids. You can see here we have an amino acid right here. This is an amino acid. Most of these are developed from some amino acid like tryptophan. Can go on to be made into melatonin. Epinephrine can go on to be made from tyrosine, things like that. Then we'll see your peptides. These are either glycoproteins or short polypeptides. Then we'll see lipids, and we'll talk about the eicosanoids, and then we'll talk about steroid hormones. All right, now, first off, amino acid derivatives. Amino acid derivatives. The first thing we want to talk about amino acids is they're made of 2 amino acids. They're derived from either tyrosine or tryptophan. Now, there's catecholamines, thyroid hormones, and melatonin. Catecholamines. Can elephants never die? Can elephants never die? Catecholamines, made by tyrosine. Catecholamines, amine. Catecholamines, can elephants never die? Catecholamines are epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine. Can elephants never die? Now, another way to remember all amino acid derivatives. Can elephants nosedive through mud? Can elephants nose dive through mud? Catecholamines. Can elephants nose dive, or can elephants never die? Catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine. Thyroid hormones, and then melatonin. Okay. Melatonin is the only amino acid derivative made by tryptophan. And people always think tryptophan makes you sleepy. No, it's going to take a long time for that tryptophan that's in the turkey to be eaten, to be converted into melatonin, and then the melatonin is going to be altered its release depending upon light levels. It is the carbs you just ate for that big meal that made you sleepy. You carb crash. All right. Peptide hormones. Now, the peptide hormones they are usually going to be prohormones or an active precursors with a carbohydrate on it that can be activated later on. But they are always chains of amino acids. They may have carbohydrates on them to cause them to be inactivated. Okay. Now there's two groups, the glycoproteins and the short polypeptides. Glycoproteins are going to be over 200 amino acids. They have carbohydrates on them. They're quite big. Now, they're the easy one to remember. Think about glycoproteins. Great teachers finish last. Great teachers finish last. This is why I'm always the last one to finish, huh? Maybe not. Glycoproteins are TSH, FSH, and LH. Great teachers finish last. Now, short polypeptides, they're going to be very hard to learn. Here's the way I'm going to tell you, and I'll show you a trick later on, but I'm just going to list them now. But I'm going to tell you, after you're done learning all the other hormones, come back, and whatever is not the other hormones that you memorized is a short polypeptide. You're like, that don't make any sense. I hope you understand that in a minute. ADH, antidiuretic hormone, oxytocin, ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone, GH growth hormone, MSH melanocyte-stimulating hormone, PRL prolactin, insulin, glucagon, parathyroid hormone PTH, CT calcitonin, atrial natriuretic peptide, which is it's a peptide, but there's smaller ones. Okay. You're like, how can I remember that? Well, I'll help you. Now, lipids. First thing is this. And let me go back, make sure I did not miss something. Okay, good. Lipids are hydrophobic. What does it mean to be hydrophobic? Hydro, water, phobic, afraid of. It's afraid of water. What does that mean? These molecules are non-polar molecules. They do not dissolve in water. Now, I need you guys to step back to chapter 3 a little bit, and even a little bit from chapter 2 in our mind. And here I'm going to draw a cell. And down the middle, I'm going to draw a line here, and I'm going to write lipid hormone. Now, the cell membrane, remember, this is the circle, and I'm going to say non-lipid hormone. Now, remember that cell membranes are primarily produce of phospholipids. Given that biochemically, the only thing that can go through the phospholipid bilayer without going through a protein is something that's lipid soluble. Well, guess what's lipid soluble? Lipids. So, let's say I have a lipid soluble hormone. Now, if you have me for AP1, you should know, based on this sketch, what kind of molecule this is. Because you were asked on a test, what is a class of lipid consisting of 4 fused rings, 3 6-carbon rings, and 1 5-carbon ring, and that would be a steroid. Now, this steroid can go right through the cell membrane, right through it, because it is a lipid, and it dissolves through the cell membrane. And when it goes in, let's say I've got an organelle right here. Let's say this organelle here, that's your mitochondria. That's the mitochondria. And on the mitochondria here, we have a hormone receptor for that steroid. And this is what's that going to do? It's going to make a lot of ATP now because it bound to that. What is happening here is this is why steroid hormones act as your energy. This is why when males have low testosterone, they get very tired, lethargic, don't have much energy. You're getting rid of that male energy. Why? You're getting rid of a hormone that passes through the cell membrane, goes into the cell, binds to an organelle like the mitochondria, tells that mitochondria to make ATP to power the cell. Now over here I have a non-lipid hormone. Maybe this is insulin, okay? And it's going through the body. Well, its receptor we're going to see is right here. Now I'm going to talk more about this. And it must bind, and it must use something called second messenger. I'm trying to say second messenger. I'm just going to say second M because I don't think I can write second messenger in there. Usually I'm writing on the board, so second M, second messenger. And that will cause changes. Okay? Now this is incredibly important and you must know this, okay? This is a big deal. Now, so what I want to make sure you guys understand is that a lipid derivative, because it is hydrophobic, it binds to a receptor on the inside of the cell, for example, the mitochondria, on the nucleus, something like that. And usually this guy comes in and increases energy usage. Sorry, because the ER was supposed to have a period at the end of it. It just messed. Okay. Anyway, the endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, now there are steroids and eicosanoids. Now, what is a steroid? Steroid is 4 fused rings to it. Now, so all steroids, remember, they have 4 fused rings. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. All right, that's a steroid. Now, steroids are hydrophobic. And what they do is they will pass through the cell membrane. Now, I'll talk more about that. Now, they are always made from cholesterol with 4 fused rings. These are, now, if you're in, let's say you guys are working out at the gym and you're trying to max your pump, swell your thick, and somebody's in the locker room, they go, psst, hey, you, come here, skinny. Let me get you, you want to get jacked? And they hand you a needle that says steroids on it. What should you do? Contrary to what after school programs said, you should accept. Accept. A-C-C-E-P-T. Accept. Androgens, cortisol, calcitriol, estrogens, progesterone, and testosterone. Accept. Eicosanoids. They are made from a molecule called arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid. This is very early in the morning and I'm getting tongue twisted there. Eicosanoids, they are either leukotrienes or prostaglandins. Now, we're going to talk about prostaglandins a little bit, but prostaglandins are involved in pain and inflammation. If you don't know, I always say if you visit a prostitute, you might end up with pain and inflammation later. Leukotriene, leuko, white blood cell, leukocyte, triene. Remember that leukotrienes, you guys may remember, these are lipids who have 3 double bonds in the fatty acid, whereas in prostaglandins have a 5-membered ring and 2 fatty acid tails in a prostaglandin. Don't know if you guys learned that in AP1. I teach it and do tests on it. I always about prostaglandins are involved in pain. That's what aspirin does, is inhibits prostaglandins. So this is where we're going to stop. And what I've done here is taken everything I've talked about is some of the things that I said here. So as I said, now the eicosanoids, that's LP. Think about it. It sounds like a hipster band, the Eicosanoids, and they just released a new vinyl LP. So the leukotrienes and prostaglandins are eicosanoids. Now remember, steroids are accept, ACCEPT, accept aldosterone, cortisol, calcitriol, estrogen, prostaglandin, testosterone. Now, estrogens, testosterone, prostaglandins, these are all produced from androgens. So I'm just going to change mine here a little bit. Aldosterone is a steroid derivative as well. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit more with that. I need to fix that slide here to match this slide here, because androgens can become estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, because they are androgynous. They're not male nor female. Now, the big one is that after you've learned all those, learn amino acids, learn the glycoproteins, learn the lipids, then what's left is those guys. Okay? It's an easy way. This is the only mnemonic I could get made. I actually went to a mnemonic generator. Is Ape Sabe Henji's many great policies provided casually in great anger. It's pretty crappy. I mean, it's easy when we're like, great teachers finish last. Can elephants never die? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, things like that. Dopamine. Okay. So, guys, I am going to complete the first lecture here. I'm going to do 3 parts. I'm going to pick up here with how we affect that signaling, and then we're going to go into some of the major glands, and I'll probably do some other actions there. So I'm going to go ahead and quit here. Take this slide here. I would print that out. Also, if you go into the content section, you will see I produce a document where I've taken all the hormones, the glands, the hormones, the chemical classes, what everything about them, to kind of put it as a good cheat sheet that you can have around with you to study as well. So please check that out. I can show you guys that when I do my intro videos into the week. So thank you guys, and pick up with the second of 3.